And so walking down a straight and narrow path, like you say, it's not just the easy path that doesn't bend. It is the constricted, narrow, difficult way that it is difficult. I mean, it's because the temptations of the world are all around.
Welcome back to Restored Gospel Podcast. We are friends having casual conversation about the things of eternity, and we welcome you into that conversation. And we start off today in 1 Nephi chapter 2. We're entering into, I think, some of the most well-known parts of the Book of Mormon with Nephi and Lehi's vision. Before we do that, I want to share some resources. This is a website, Book of Mormon Study. It's BOMSTUDY.org, BOM in the word study.org. That is actually Bob Bobbitt's done a work on this. And you can go here and hit study guides. You can go to First Nephi, and like we're in chapter 2. Bring up your study guide, and you can get a printable version here. This is really neat, especially he goes through, these are set up like you review the whole book. There's all kinds of information and background. You have key verses, you have major sections, you have narrative of what's taking place through the chapter and overview. And then at the end, especially for kids or for family study, there's questions that get you to think about some of the key verses and what it's trying to say. And that's for every chapter. There's almost 2,000 pages of study guide here. So that's just Book of Mormon study.org, BOMstudy.org. There's other things on here too. So play around with that website. I think it's a great resource. And then here's Shane's YouTube site, Restoration Believer. And if you want to listen to the Book of Mormon, you can go to playlists. And here is Book of Mormon readings, and they're lined out. Chapter 1.
And inasmuch as thy brethren shall rebel against thee,
hear that gentle voice.
The lands. And inasmuch as thy brethren shall rebel against thee, they shall be cut off from the presence of the Lord.
So there's music, audio, video, but you can just listen to it too. If you're falling asleep at night and you want to listen to the word being read. So yeah, go to playlist, Book of Mormon readings, and you can get the whole.
And inasmuch as ye shall keep my commandments, ye shall prosper, and shall be led to a land of promise.
Stop.
Yeah, even.
He's got some other videos here. So anyway, a couple of resources. Well, let's get in. Today, there was a couple of quotes I wanted to bring out in our sermon. Jason Anderson said, I like this, and we're going to get into this in the Book of Mormon Day. This life isn't about getting out of here alive. It's about getting out of here with life. I think we are in preservation mode a lot, trying to avoid pain, trying to avoid, harm, physical harm to ourselves, spiritual harm. We're just trying to get through this life as easy as we can. And the goal isn't to get out of here alive, so to speak, with all of our faculties intact. Is to get out of here with life within us. We talked about that last episode, Jesus.
Yeah, and Mike, I think that's a good point. I think we've seen that, especially with in the RLDS since the split in '84. I think a lot of people are kind of, on cruise control, just thinking, okay, it's going to happen anytime, and so we get a storehouse and sort of just hunker down. Like we're waiting for the nuke to drop, and that's right. We've got to be pursuing, like you said, pursuing life.
Yeah, trying to preserve ourselves. I thought it was a great quote. I just wrote down here. We see this with the prophets and godly men. They were willing to lay down their life while bringing the words of Christ in hopes that it would bring, quote, actual, spiritual life to someone else. Abinadi. Hey, I'm willing to give up my life because this testimony is going to bring others to Jesus. And that's what it's about. So are we willing to give up trying to preserve our lives for the sake of allowing Christ to make us alive?
Yeah.
He also said today, this is pretty neat. We are not able to generate illumination like the sun or the stars. We are illuminated beings, and we're either receiving more and more light from the Lord, or we're becoming more and more illuminated, or we're becoming more and more dark. There's not this ability to remain in stagnation, right? The Book of Mormon teaches this very clearly in Alma 9. I wanted to read this scripture. Therefore, he that will, because we talked last week about hardening our heart and our blind eyes. It says, he that hardens his heart, the same receiveth the lesser portion of the word. And he that will not harden his heart, to him is given the greater portion of the word, until it is given unto him to know the mysteries of God, until they know them in full. And they that harden their hearts, to them is given the lesser portion of the word, until they know nothing concerning his mysteries. And that word until, Shane, I think denotes movement. You're either receiving God's word until you know it in full, or you're receiving a lesser portion of the word until you know nothing. So there's not this ability to just remain in the middle. This until means you're moving either to the left, or to the right, closer to God, right?
Right.
So I just thought that was some good thoughts today, because we talked about hardening our heart last week and blinding our mind, and just remind us, Shane, how the hardening of the heart and the blinding of the eyes and what they're related to, vision and what you were saying last week.
Yeah. So the mind. So if we're to be one heart and one mind with Jesus, then your heart is the center of your personality, your love, your ability to feel, kind of the emotional center of your being, and your mind is the logical center, the part that understands things, that has wisdom. And so to be of one heart and one mind, we have to have both of those elements of your being under subjection and in submission to God.
Well, we're going to start chapter 2, right? Book of Mormon.
Yep, 2 and part of 3.
Yeah. All right. I closed it accidentally. Okay, let's get it pulled up here. So this is from the RCE, or we call that the Restored Covenant Edition. It was basically, they went back to the original writings for those that aren't in RLDS culture. A man by the name of Ray Treat in his Book of Mormon Foundation, Zarahemla Foundation rather, went through and with the original manuscripts went back to the original Book of Mormon. So that's what we'll be using today. And I had a little beginning. This is from the study notes on that Book of Mormon study.org. This is just because we're going to read about this, Shane, and I saw in your video on chapter 2 that you made this little comment as well as you're reading the Book of Mormon. In 1 Nephi 1, the 17th verse, it says, I make an abridgment of the record of my father, upon which plates I have made with mine own hands. Wherefore, after I have abridged the record of my father, then will I make an account of mine own life. And in First Nephi, the second chapter, Nephi opens up by saying, and now I, Nephi, do not give the genealogy of my fathers in this part of my record. Neither at any time shall I give it after upon these plates which I am writing, for it is given in the record which has been kept by my father. Wherefore I do not write it in this work, for it sufficeth me to say that we are a descendant of Joseph. And so, Shane, tell us why this is interesting and what happened when Joseph Smith was translating the plates.
Well, so as he was translating, he did the first 116 pages, and Martin Harris, and those were off of those plates of Lehi. They that would have been Lehi's record, which was actually had a lot more details, genealogy, and talked about the wars and a lot more details of things that their people had gone through. But anyway, those plates were translated first. And when Martin Harris convinced Joseph to finally allow him to take those pages, he ended up losing them. And so God had so that was all lost. And rather than retranslate the whole thing again, God had him just translate the plates, these small plates of Nephi, which contained really just the spiritual stuff. And it left out the genealogies and the wars and all the details and geographical things that didn't have any eternal consequence. And so what we have in our record now is just the spiritual based items.
So Nephi didn't, didn't probably know, but he was told, to make his own plates, and they come into play, we think, later on, right? So he starts out here and says something that I thought was pretty neat. His desire for these plates of Nephi was that I want to make right the things of God. For the fullness of mine intent is that I persuade men to come unto the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I just love how this starts out. What is Nephi's heart? As he's etching here on metal, what is he being moved by?
Right. Yeah, the whole motivation of what he's doing is for the salvation of mankind, which tells you right there that he's doing God's work. That's what God's work is too, is to try to bring us back to him. And everything that he has done, the Old Testament law, the Christ coming and dying on the cross, everything he's done has been to try to bring us back to him. And Nephi had this same goal.
Yeah, he sets the stage, and I just like it gives us such a clear picture of what we're going to be reading is for the direct welfare of us to come to God. He says the things, verse 5, wherefore the things which are pleasing unto the world I do not write, but the things which are pleasing unto God and unto those who are not of the world. Wherefore I shall give commandment unto my seed, they shall not occupy these plates with things which are not of worth unto the children of men. So,
yeah, I find it fascinating though that I think it'd be tough to do. So you have this journey, you leave Jerusalem, you're on foot with your family and your camels or whatever they brought with them, and you're traveling down the coast of the Red Sea, and down through Saudi Arabia. And that was actually a known spice trail. They carried spices along that route. Because the reason we believe we know the route is because he said we went in a southeasterly direction first, and then he tells you that they turned a sharp eastward direction, went eastward from that point on after Nahum. And so there's pretty good information geographically of where they traveled, that they ran next to the borders of the Red Sea. Well, so that was a known spice trade route. And I find it really fascinating that in there it says that God had told them not to use fire. So they were not able to use campfires at night to stay warm or to cook their food. It says they ate raw food the whole way. And he remarked how they ate all this raw food. God had commanded them to eat raw food, raw meat. And yet their women were able to still produce milk for their babies and that sort of thing. And, you would think that he'd give a lot more detail in terms of what they saw, how they struggled, and then of course that ocean voyage, but he doesn't really. I mean, it give you some minor little hints here and there, but the focus of this document is spiritual growth. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I just pulled this picture out from the notes at bookofmormonstudy.org, a possible trade route. And they talked about, it's hard to know today what the geography was like back then, but this was one that seemed to mesh up with he says this is the possible Valley of Lemuel, but the next slide gives us just a little picture of some of these little streams and valleys in that area. So I just put that up there. Sometimes it's easier to view when you're reading in a book when you see exactly where they were at. So they were up here in Jerusalem and heading down to the Red Sea.
Right. What's the name of that place there, Mike?
Well, this is the Valley of Lemuel. Wadi
No, no, the name there.
Wadi Tayyib. You're just making fun of me. Wadi Tayyib Aslam. Unless you're from the Eastern Semites, it's pronounced Wadi Tayyib Islam. That sound important.
Yep.
All right. So anyway, two sets of plates. Go back here. So I didn't have a whole lot. Shane, do you have anything else that Laman and Lemuel and Ishmael start to rebel again against their father and Nephi? And why was that? Well, verse 13 says, it came to pass they were desirous to return to the land of Jerusalem. So this is an underlying theme, it seems, throughout with these two boys, whether it was going back to get the plates, this anger, this same desire keeps welling up, doesn't it?
Yeah. I find it interesting. I imagine for Laman and Lemuel, it would have been tough because they've already lost their wealth. Laman being the firstborn son had a double portion, so he lost more than anybody else. And then they make that journey back to mom and dad. And now dad says, go back again to Jerusalem. So they have to make that journey again, multiple days journey. And, which was not easy. It was hot and it was on foot, they're sleeping on the ground, I mean, it wasn't like they were staying in a hotel, and they get back to Jerusalem and now they got to convince Ishmael and his family to all come with them. And I would imagine it'd be hard for Laman and Lemuel to leave again. They've already made this trip multiple times and they're seeing the places where they used to hang out and maybe even they maybe even seen friends. I mean, we don't know. It doesn't say, but it's, I would think it would have been hard being as worldly as they were, and design longing for Jerusalem would have been hard to leave again.
Do you think, I see like this spiritual theme that when you don't commit to God 100% and you kind of have, you're trying to straddle the fence or you have 1 foot in, but there's a large part of you that's still not, unlike Nephi, who is just all in. I'm going to obey my dad no matter what. This seems impossible, but Jesus will provide a way if he gives us a commandment. And when you're not that way, it seems like you're always wanting to go back. You're always wanting to go back to the way it was. You want to go back to your comfortable life, your sinful life, go back to Israel representing the sinfulness of the people, and they're on their way to a new land where they can worship God away from the sins of the people. But that's your inclination. If you're not all in, there's always something pulling at your heart to go back to your old ways, your sinful ways and comfortable ways. And
Right.
that's a theme that I think plays out with Laman and Lemuel repeatedly.
Yeah, and there's times where Laman and Lemuel, it says that they humbled themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and they begged Nephi for forgiveness. And there was even a couple times later on where it even says they tried to worship him. They knew God was with him, and they, out of fear or whatever, they tried to worship him. And so you can see that God was working with them. God was trying to get through to their hearts, but they just didn't get it. They just were not converted. And I think you're right. They were straddling both worlds. That's tough to do.
I pondered on this. We're going to get right into one of these instances. I can you imagine going to church, Shane, on a Sunday and sitting next to someone in the pew that wanted to murder you and tried to murder you, and that you completely forgave them enough to have that relationship restored so that you're able to sit there and worship with them? I've never experienced anything like that in my life. And then let alone the person that tried to murder you is actually part of your family. Let's
Right.
let's read about this a minute, because verse 15, Nephi says, how have you not hearkened unto the word of the Lord? And he repeats this theme 3 times. How is it you've forgotten that you've seen an angel of the Lord? How is it that you've forgotten how great things the Lord has done for us in delivering us out of the hands of Laban, and also that we should obtain the record? Yea, how is it that you have forgotten that the Lord is able to do all things according to his will for the children of men? And if it so be that they exercise faith in him, wherefore let us be faithful to him. this is a this theme goes hand in hand with hardening of the heart. I
Mhm.
believe that whether it's the chicken or the egg, but as you harden your heart, you begin to forget all of the good things God has done for you, all of his promises, his majesty, or perhaps you begin to forget those things because you're not spending time with him, and that leads to the hardening of the heart. I don't know
Right.
which one comes first, but they seem to go hand in hand, we think.
They do, yeah, the hardening of the heart and the blindness of the mind. The mind is always tied to vision, and the heart is always tied to hardness, hardness or softness.
Mm.
It's interesting.
So with Laman and Lemuel desiring to go back to their old ways, Nephi is telling him, "You've forgotten. You've forgotten." I see this in the lives of my friends. I see it in my life that at times I forget all of the wonderful things God has done for me, and it's so easy for those to be far from your mind and just focus on the immediate suffering, and you have to
Mhm.
physically and intentionally make sure you go through in your mind and remember all of your blessings. Remember all of your blessings. I remember one time having a really tough time in my life in college, laying on my bed, and I began to physically, intentionally make myself go back through my life from my birth, thanking God that I was born to parents who knew the gospel, who had access to the Book of Mormon, and so on, and for my youth leaders, and for the testimonies on my family, and all of the Wednesday night prayer service. And I went on through my life, and by the time I was done, I was seeing all of these things God had done for me, and it completely changed my perspective. And it wasn't easy. I had to be intentional about it because I wasn't feeling. But I think the Lord directed me in that instance to remember and not forget all of the things that He's done and been with us in our lives is important.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think back on in my life times where I have, done really bonehead things, and how blind I was at the time. I thought I was 100% right, and then later you look back and like, man, I handled that completely wrong. And I think it is time tied to that blindness of the mind that happens when your heart gets hardened, when you allow pride or the natural man to step in. You just sort of pull a dark veil over yourself, and you make terrible mistakes. And I think Laman and Lemuel, the difference between Laman and Lemuel and Nephi, I don't think it's that Nephi never sinned, but he was truly converted to God. He was truly believed. He truly converted, and so his response to God was always right on the money.
Mm,
Even when his own father was murmuring, he still responded. Whereas Laman and Lemuel, they were more emotional and reactive. They were very emotion driven. They, you know, one minute they're saying, thanks Nephi for saving us or whatever, and then the next minute they want to kill him because they're
right.
tired and hungry.
Yeah.
you know?
Well, that's coming up. That's coming up here. So Nephi's telling him that Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. That's going to be fulfilled. In verse 22 says, "Behold, they've rejected the prophets. Jeremiah they've cast into prison, and they sought to take away the life of my father so much they had driven him out of the land. Now behold, I say unto you, if you return unto Jerusalem, you shall also perish with them. And now, if you have the choice, go up to the land and remember the words which I speak unto you, that if you go, you will also perish. For thus the Spirit of the Lord constraineth me that I should speak." So the Spirit is telling him to tell them these things. And then it says, "It came to pass when I, Nephi, had spoken these words unto my brethren, they were angry with me." And I had a question here, Shane. Why were
Mhm.
they angry? They must have believed the words that Nephi was telling them and know that it was coming from God and that it was true, or they would have just blown him off and be like, whatever, little brother, we're done. See ya on the other side. I'm going back to Jerusalem, right? But
Right.
because I think because they're showing that they're angry, they had to believe that it was true, and they knew that Nephi had the power to speak with us with the Spirit. So I asked this question: is this a visceral reaction when we hear truth that we're not able to tolerate or deal with at the time because of our current wicked state, that we hate to be told truth that confronts our wickedness inside of us and our pride lashes out? So
Mhm.
I mean, think of a time when you knew you were wrong and somebody caught you on it and called you on it. And that first reaction is either to hide or to put them down or say, "You're crazy. What are you talking about? That's not true." Deny it. I think there's this visceral reaction within us that lashes out. And so they knew Nephi was speaking truth and that they would be destroyed if they went back, but they didn't want to hear that and they didn't want to deal with it. And so their only reaction was just to be angry and lash out.
Yeah, this happened multiple times. The same thing happened when they were on the ship, and they lashed out at him, and it says that after he had spoken, he spoke to him like really passionately. It was in chapter 5. He spoke to him passionately, begging them to repent, begging them to turn back to God, and reminding them that they'd seen an angel just like he did here. And after he get done with this beautiful speech, um, then the one sentence says, "And my brothers were angered with me." It's like, it was just beautiful. I read it the other day, I recorded it the other day, and it was just like really powerful. And then his brother's just like mad, and I think that's true. And later on, I think it's maybe in Second Nephi, where Lehi, he says, you've been mad at your brother, and you've been saying that he wants to be a king over you or wants to control over you, but he was only looking out for your well-being. And when you're saying that he's being hard on you, he's just speaking the truth. And you're reacting to the truth. Your brother has just been acting in love for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a powerful understanding, to realize how we respond when the Spirit's not in us.
Yeah, it's a good measuring stick as well. If you ever find this happen in you and you become really angry when someone's telling you something, I mean, it could be for other reasons, but it could be because it's the truth and you're just not prepared to deal with it at that day and time because of where your spirit's at. And so
Yeah.
you're that spirit that wells up of anger. It's that type of response.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the class I watched with Corey, where the response was angry, at what he was saying, and he was
Mhm.
reading right from the Book of Mormon, you know.
Right. Yeah, you start talking about God and the Book of Mormon's truths and things, and
Mhm.
you'll find it very quickly.
Yeah.
Well, it came to pass that I prayed unto the Lord, saying, "According to my faith, wilt thou deliver me from the hands of my brethren?" Because it says in verse 27, they were exceeding wroth. They did bind me with cords, for they sought to take away my life. They were going to leave him in the wilderness to be devoured by a wild beast. That's what it says. We're going to tie you up, throw you out here with the wolves and the lions and whatever there were, the wild boars, and they're gonna tear you up and eat you and kill you, which is
It's a little bit more than sibling rivalry there.
yeah. I think it's what you said, right? It's not. I mean, if you're thinking in your right mind and things don't go well when we go against our brother who carries the spirit, and even the angels come to his aid, that common sense and rationality is just blinded by anger at this point because they know his words are true and that he's a chosen vessel of the Lord, and they're still going to try to kill him. And
Right.
that's how far hate and anger can go in rebelling against God. That's how dark and fallen you can become.
Yeah.
But Nephi prays, right? And he breaks the bands and they fell off of him. And verse 31 says, "It came to pass, they were angry with me again and sought to lay hands upon me. But behold, one of the daughters of Ishmael and her mother and one of the sons of Ishmael did plead with my brethren, insomuch that they did soften their hearts and they did cease striving to take my life." I can't help but think right here, Shane, that I wonder if this daughter that pled for his life is the one he married, because it says he married a daughter of Ishmael. I
Yeah.
wonder if she just had a little bit of the feelers for Nephi, and she's like, "Come on,
Right.
guys, leave him alone." And next thing you know, or maybe because of this, Nephi is like, starstruck, right? And
Right.
"Ooh, what a pretty
Yeah, that's what
lady!"
Nephi's like, "Yeah, that's a good one right there."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She doesn't want me to get eaten by wild beasts, so
Right.
maybe we'll fix my camera there. So I read that one time. I thought, oh, he marries one of the daughters of Ishmael. I wonder if it was this little lass right here.
Right.
So how
I
does go ahead?
I was just gonna say, I just love how how relentless Nephi is in his speaking to and loving his brothers. Because you're sitting here, the guy wants to take your life. These two brothers want you just to, they want to leave you to rot and die in the wilderness. And I'm thinking, my natural man says, well, then let them stay. You know what I mean? Do we really want these guys on our trip when we
Right.
know they're out for blood? This isn't the first time they tried to kill him either. God had to stop him the other time with the angel. And so it says here, it says, and it came to pass that this is in verse 30, and it came to pass that when I had said these words, behold, the bands were loosed from off my hands and feet, and I stood before my brethren, and I spake unto them again. So he gets up and he begins talking to him again. And I guess what this really shows is a couple things. One, Nephi knows that God has commanded Lehi to take his family. He didn't say take the obedient children. He said take the family. And so Nephi doesn't want any to be lost or left behind. And so he's doing everything in his power to, one, submit to his father, but two, to show love to his brothers. And it's just amazing how quickly he is to forgive them after they did this. I don't want to get too far ahead if you're going to read that, but.
Well, so it says the daughter and the mother pled for them to be nice and quit picking on Nephi. And it came to pass they were sorrowful because of their wickedness, insomuch that they did bow down before me and did plead with me that I would forgive them of the thing that he had done against me. And it came to pass that I did frankly forgive them for all they had done, and I did exhort them that they should pray unto the Lord their God for forgiveness. And it came to pass that they did so. And after they were done praying, we went back on our journey. So a couple of things there. I still don't know how these guys, blinded by anger, were all of a sudden pacified by two women pleading for him, but something happened. And I asked the question, are they really sorry? Because this repeated behavior and pattern, or did they feel guilty because they saw the women, just begging them to stop?
Well, or maybe one of those women, maybe they had their eyes on them because they ended up marrying a couple of them later. Maybe in the same scenario.
We know that it wasn't a godly sorrow because they continue to fall into these patterns. But for the time being, they bowed down. And I think even more neat is Nephi's response. It says he frankly forgave them. There was no, well, I'll tell you one thing, you do this again and we're going to have problems, but all right, there's no conditions. He frankly forgave them. And not only that, what was he most concerned about? Restoring their relationship with their heavenly Father.
Right.
It wasn't just about how Nephi was hurt. He's like, you can't do this and not be out of line with the Father. I need to know that you're all right with them. So please ask his forgiveness. And they all have prayer together. And not until then do they continue on. And that's, how interesting is that? When someone's wronged you, Shane, and has come to apologize, to even have that in your mind. Well, let's go pray to the Father and make sure our relationships are good there, right?
Right. Yeah, there's so many things in those few verses that you could talk about. I mean, first of all, he frankly forgave them, but then he's the one writing all this down. So he just kind of mentions it. It's sort of a passing comment. Yeah, I forgave him. And then he moves on to talk more about what the important part was. He understood that his forgiveness of them was irrelevant compared to them getting God's forgiveness. That's really who they needed, because what happens to him is just going to affect their journey. But what happens with God is going to affect their souls. And so he mentions it just in a passing. And then he says, and I did exhort them that they would pray unto their Lord, their God, for forgiveness. And it came to pass that they did so. And after they had done praying unto the Lord, we did travel again on our journey toward the tent of our Father. And that tent of our Father phrase is one used over and over. And it's referring back to moving back under the authority of our Father, being back in submission to Dad. So there's just a lot there. And Nephi he just did everything right. His responses and his reactions were just completely godly there.
Well, we're going to quickly get to a dream If you don't have anything else to add before the dream, when they get back to the father, he tells them, "Hey, I've dreamed a dream," or in other words, "I've seen a vision." And I like this because of the reason, because I've seen this vision, I have reason to rejoice in the Lord because of Nephi and Sam. For I have reason to believe that they will be saved in their seed. But behold, Laman and Lemuel, I fear exceedingly because of you. And then he gets into this vision. But I thought, what great diverse feelings of Lehi, from rejoicing because of Sam and Nephi, and then exceedingly fearful. So what in the world has been in this dream to cause him to be at the one side extremely happy and blessed, and at the other end extremely fearful for the attitudes of his family and how they're on both ends of the spectrum?
Right.
You
And I
think
think their son's reactions to it too is interesting, the psychology of it. I mean, if you think about Lamia and Lemia, you're the two oldest sons. Your dad comes to you and says, I've had a dream, and your two younger brothers, they're going to be doing great. They're just going to be wonderful. But you guys, you're in trouble. That has to be a painful and frustrating response, or frustrating thing to hear from your dad. I'm sure their pride welled up in them, and they're thinking, "What are you talking about? It's just a dream." And yet,
mm-hmm.
and then Nephi, on the flip side of that, Nephi didn't seem to become arrogant by it, or kind of put it up in their faces or anything.
Right. Well, you want to get into the dream? Should we just
Sure.
go through it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It came to pass that I saw a man, and he was dressed in a white robe, and he came and stood before me. And it came to pass that as he spoke unto me, he bade me follow him. And it came to pass that as I followed him, and after I had followed him, and it came to pass that as I followed him, and after I had followed him, I beheld myself in a dark and dreary waste. I'm going to ask you a question, Shane, because I saw somebody speak to this on one of the boards chat rooms that we're on. Do you think this was a false spirit appearing as an angel of light? Because they made the point, the spirit says, "Follow me." This personage in a white robe says, "Follow me," and then you it says after you followed him for a while, you're in a dark and dreary wilderness, like it had led him into a dark and dreary wilderness. And it wasn't until he began to pray unto the Lord that he would have mercy that things changed. Have you ever heard that before, or what's your thoughts
I
on that?
have, yeah. I think I saw that same board. So yeah, it's an interesting thought. I mean, he was dressed in a white robe. We know that Satan can take on the appearance of light. Stood before him and said, "Follow me," and he followed him. I mean, the thing about this is this dream. All of this is symbolic.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like this actually happened, and then the dream began with seeing the tree and all that. So this is all part of the same dream. Um, it could go either way. It could be that he saw that the person in the white robe could have been Christ, and because he followed him, began following him, he realized in what bad condition he was in. He realized how lost he really was. Or it could have been a type and shadow for his life up to that point, where he had been following men, and men of the world, or been deceived and been in a dark and dreary waste, and realized that he needed God. So I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think either way, he became aware of who he was and where he was spiritually, and he desired more.
Yeah, that was the first time, I think, within the last year that I had heard of that. I The other thought is that I've typically had, or more recently, was when you decide to follow Jesus, when you respond to his call to follow him, if it was Jesus, that the adversary is going to move upon you, throw those darts, those fiery darts, and you're going to find yourself in with the darkness and grief and things closing in, and that if you want to continue to follow him, that prayer is the way to go. That continued connection with him. And as we read on, when he prays, then things happen. So I just like to present different ideas and let the Holy Spirit work with people. I think in these stories they're left somewhat vague, although we get pretty accurate information later on when Nephi has the same experience. We get the code word or the little code book laid out, kind of what everything means to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
But I like this. So what happens when he prays? Go ahead. You want to read verse 48, Shane? Or I guess we'll start at
47, right?
47. Yeah.
Yeah. And after that I had traveled for the space of many hours in darkness, I began to pray unto the Lord that he would have mercy on me according to the multitude of his tender mercies. And it came to pass that after I had prayed unto the Lord, behold, a large and spacious field. And it came to pass that I beheld a tree whose fruit was desirable to make one happy. And it came to pass that I did go forth and partake of the fruit thereof, and beheld that it was most sweet above all I had ever before tasted. Yea, and I beheld that the fruit thereof was white to exceed all whiteness that I had ever seen. And as I partook of the fruit thereof, it filled my soul with exceeding great joy.
Okay. I love the poetry. I think this language is beautiful. Uh, to have a vision of this extensive, powerful thing where it gives you such happiness after you've experienced it, to try to have to come up with words to explain to someone how great things are, you know. But when he says sweet above all that I've ever tasted, white
Right.
above the whiteness that I've ever seen. Imagine, Shane, if you're trying to explain this for the first time and you've never heard Lehi's vision, how are you going to describe with mere words to mortals the spiritual thing that you just had from partaking of this fruit of the tree, right?
Yeah, it'd be tough.
It's a beautiful. I think Nephi is even more poetic when he goes into it. But it says it filled my soul with exceeding great joy.
Well, and Mike, something else interesting about this is so Hebrew doesn't have a lot of description words. They don't use a lot of adjectives. But this is probably the most descriptive words you find. Like when Nephi talks about his broken ankles or swollen ankles on the ship, he just used the adjective exceeding. So it was like I had exceeding swollen ankles, and they were exceeding sore, and it was exceeding painful. He doesn't really. I mean, that's not a quote, but that's
The
close.
Hebrews want to go,
And
oh, it's killing me, because that's
yeah,
that would
yeah,
be
we'd be like, oh,
completely
it's like the
incorrect.
size of a grapefruit. It was all
Freaking
purple, and I mean,
throbbing,
yeah.
prickly.
But this one is got more description than most description sentences that you see in the rest of the Book of Mormon. I think it's because it was so powerful. He just had to. It just didn't seem right to say exceeding. It was exceeding white, and it was exceeding desirable, and he tried to find words that fit what he was feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And then what happens in verse 53? This is one of the most excellent parts of the whole vision, I think. That after he's had this exceeding sweet and white fruit, what happens? What does he say here?
Yeah, he wants his family there.
Right. And that is the natural, if you want to test of whether something you're participating in is from God or not and is truly the Spirit of God, does your love and empathy for those around you immediately begin to grow? And as soon as he partook of that fruit, it says, I was desirous that my family should come also. Right?
Yeah.
That's desirable. He wants them. He knows it was desirable above all, and I want my family to come.
Right.
So I don't know if we want to keep reading verse, but yeah, go ahead and pick up
Yeah,
and
I
read.
can.
I don't have a whole lot more notes for a while, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, so 53 says, wherefore I began to be desirous that my family should partake of it also, for I knew that it was desirous above all other fruit. And as I cast my eyes round about, that perhaps I might discover my family also, and I beheld a river, and it ran along, and it was near the tree of which I was partaking the fruit. And I looked to behold from whence it came, and I saw the head thereof a little way off. At the head thereof I beheld your mother Sariah, and Sam and Nephi, and they stood as if they knew not whither they should go. And it came to pass that I beckoned unto them, and I also did say unto them with a loud voice, that they should come unto me and partake of the fruit which was desirable above all other fruit. And it came to pass that they did come unto me and partake of the fruit also. And it came to pass that I was desirous that Laman and Lemuel should come and partake of the fruit also. Wherefore I cast my eyes toward the head of the river, that perhaps I might see them. And it came to pass that I saw them, but they would not come unto me and partake of the fruit. So one thing I find interesting about this is, each individual person had to make that journey. Every single person had to walk along that path, holding onto that rod of iron and getting to that tree and partaking of it for themselves. And he listed out each name. He didn't say, your brothers or, my mom. I mean, he listed out each person's name that he was beckoning. And I think that's indicative of our relationship with Christ. Each one of us has to walk that path on our own, holding on to the Savior for dear life to get ourselves to that tree where we can partake of that fruit. And Laman and Lemuel just weren't interested. They just weren't interested. They didn't want to make the journey. They didn't want to hold on, or they just want to do what they wanted to do. And I think it's really a solid representation of life. I mean, each of us has to make that path, make that choice.
Do you have any thoughts on the river that he saw running along towards the tree?
Well, later on, it says that that Lehi didn't notice the river. He saw the river, but he didn't notice how dirty it was. Mm-hmm. It was full of filth. Mm-hmm. So I would say, it has to do with the sins. And I believe it later on, it does in the next chapter, it talks about what the river was. Yeah.
Well, we'll leave it for then. It is neat. I think we'll talk about that when Nephi starts to have his vision. There's several, I think, themes to talk about on why he had one and why others didn't, and things like that, and why maybe it was even more thorough or a little bit different than Lehi's, although they're somewhat the same. So
yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I think this has to do with fatherhood. So Lehi is at that tree, he's partaking of the fruit, and all he can think about is his wife and kids and getting them to that tree. And he missed that detail.
Yeah, that's good.
He's thinking about it. Yeah. Whereas Nephi, he could be more focused on details. He didn't have kids involved in this.
Yeah. Or a wife yet.
Or a wife. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a good point. Yeah. That Lehi's focus from his viewpoint of that vision. That's neat how you can see the same thing. And yet from your perspective and where you're at in life, how it means something a little bit different to you. Right. And that's pretty neat. That's why.
Well, and I think that really goes to show that it reinforces this idea that we each have to have our own testimony. Because if Nephi had just relied on Lehi's explanation of that dream, it would have been customized information for Lehi. But but God had something else to reveal to Nephi. Even though it was the same vision, same experience, he got something different out of it. And then that's, each one of us have all of our own gifts and talents and our thought processes, and God wants an individual relationship with each one of us.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you continue on verse 62, because this is where the rod comes in. The rod of iron, one of the most known phrases in the Latter-day Saint culture in the Book of Mormon. You talk about the rod of iron, everybody knows what this is.
Yep. And I beheld a rod of iron, and it extended along the bank of the river and led to the tree by which I stood. And I also beheld a straight and narrow path, which came along by the rod of iron, even to the tree by which I stood. And it also led by the head of the fountain unto a large and spacious field, as if it had been a world. And I saw numberless concourses of people, many of whom were pressing forward, that they might obtain the path which led unto the tree by which I stood. And it came to pass they did come forth and commenced in the path which led to the tree. And it came to pass that there arose a mist of darkness, yea, even an exceeding great mist of darkness, insomuch that they which had commenced in the path did lose their way, that they wandered off and were lost. And it came to pass that I beheld others pressing forward, and they came forth and caught hold of the end of the rod of iron, and they did press forward through the midst of darkness, clinging to the rod of iron, even until they came forth till they did come forth and partake of the fruit of the tree. And after that they had partaken of the fruit of the tree, they did cast their eyes about as if they were ashamed. Do you want to keep going, or?
I wanted to talk about this word right here that they did, press forward. Only because I knew I'd heard that before, and later on in Nephi, Second Nephi or First Nephi, towards the end, there's a few scriptures that use this word pressing forward. And I think it's because Nephi had this vision here that he's incorporated this vision into his life as he begins to teach people the doctrine of Christ and what to do. And he uses the same exact language here. He's talking about that he saw people pressing forward as they caught hold of the rod of iron. We'll talk about what that rod is. And they did press forward through the mists of darkness, clinging to the rod of iron, right? Clinging, you're just holding on so tight, knowing that it's your safety, even until they got and were able to partake of the tree. And later on, we're going to talk about, as we go through the book of First Nephi, we're going to see Nephi use these words again, only he's using it in the form of, what do we do in our life? How do we get to the kingdom? What is the doctrine of Christ? And you enter in at the gate and you're baptized, but then it says, and then you press forward. And so your life after being baptized, you're going to find yourself in mists of darkness, and you're called to press forward. And he says, and they were pressing forward, or we say enduring to the end until you're saved and you have eternal life. So I like that this little phrase here that he saw in the vision and how these people were acting, that he then in his teaching later, when he's teaching people the doctrine of Christ, he's incorporated this vision, though he doesn't specifically, but he takes the aspects and says, this is how we bring this into our everyday life. And I'm going to teach you the doctrine of Christ and what we should be doing, as far as acting, right, where the rubber meets the road. So it's kind of neat, that phrase there.
Right.
I think the Bible Project's gotten me into looking at repeated phrases and themes in this kind of writing. So it's so we'll see this language again.
Yeah. Good. Before you keep going, go back up to 63. One thing to mention there, where it says straight, the straight and narrow path. So I believe it was in 1837. I know in 1908, that word straight was changed to S-T-R-A-I-G-H-T. And that was actually, those are two different words. The straight, like a straight line is what they changed it to. Now the RCE changes it back to how it was originally written, and that would be the correct way. A straight is used, straight means a narrow or constricted path. It doesn't
like
mean
this right here, right?
You look like it doesn't mean a straight line.
Two, right?
Yeah, so like the Straits of Gibraltar or a straitjacket, that's S-T-R-A-I-T. And we don't use that word that much anymore, but it is a distinct different meaning. And so I think this is a wonderful change that the RCE made, bringing it back to the way the original manuscript was written. And that it brings different understanding. When you think of a straight line, there's no spiritual significance to straight line other than, God's paths are straight,
Well, it seems like it's making it easy, right? There's no cricket. You just, I can see straight ahead. Everything's real clear. I know where I'm heading. I got it all laid out. I'm just hanging on this little rod, walking down this easy straight path with no challenges or anything. But look at this picture. Imagine that path going through these itty bitty tiny rocks where it's very constricted and, it's not necessarily linear straight, but constrictive, and you don't have room to sway off of it,
Right. Well, and straight, the word straight was used in to identify righteousness. So, the straight and narrow path was a way of saying being righteous or being constrained, being controlled, living you're living in a certain way that brings glory to God. And so walking down a straight and narrow path, like you say, it's not just the easy path that doesn't bend. It is the constricted, narrow, difficult way that it is difficult. I mean, it's because the temptations of the world are all around us. So it's not just the mists of darkness, but it's also the constant barrage of temptations, the being ashamed when the people make fun of us and things like that. That happens every single day. And so when you're clinging to the rod, you're white knuckled to the rod. And you're walking on that straight path. It's not easy. And I think that the RCE changed that definition and brought it back to what it was supposed to be originally.
That's good. That's an interesting fact, and one that is good to hold on to and think about. Well, we're almost at an hour. I think with that little nugget, this may be a good place to leave off, and we'll pick up next time, and we'll get into what Nephi saw, how things were different, how things were expounded on, changed, why they were a little different, and see if there's additional meaning to pull out of this scripture. I'll leave with a little testimony, Shane. When I was on my mission, we were in California for a period of time, and we had a really rough time there as far as some things that happened with the saints there, and people not wanting to be involved. And we had a falling out with the pastor and some deals over giving communion. And without going into all the details, the leaders of the association we were under came out and talked to us for a weekend and ended up pulling us out of the area. So we're driving home in my truck and feeling pretty despondent, pretty like we'd failed, like we'd done something wrong. And we were somewhere in the middle of Texas, and my truck began to shake. I looked at my friend Adam and I said, something's not right here. We got to pull over. So we were just coming up on an exit. It was about 6 p.m. There was one little lone gas station sitting there. And as we pulled into the gas station, we saw this guy pushing his car off the road and walking over to a phone booth. And we pulled up there, and there was one person ahead of us. We're kind of impatient. We're like, oh, I hope they can help us. And finally put the truck up on the rack and looked at the tires. And the guy said, all of your tire treads are separated. You need 4 new tires. I said, okay. Well, I knew it was late. And he said, I just happen to have 4 tires here that fits this truck. I can have them on and have you going in about an hour. I said, okay, great. Do it. So we walked away from that and went across and got some snacks at the gas station. And we saw this guy just kind of slam the phone down and looked despondent. And he was like, oh. So we walked up and started talking to him, asking what was happening. He had gone out to California to buy a car, and he was on his way back to Tulsa, and the car had broken down, and he was stranded there. And so we talked amongst ourselves. We're like, well, we're actually heading back to Independence, but we're going to be in Tulsa for the night. And so you want to give him a ride? So we said, hey, we're not, we didn't actually think we were going to make it all the way to Tulsa that night, but we said, we're going that way. We could take you a little ways. Oh, that'd be great. So long story short, as he's getting ready to get in the truck, he walks around the back. He's like, Book of Mormon. He goes, my wife's been reading that book. So we put him in the car, and he's pretty smelly. He smells like cigarette smoke and fairly dirty. And he had a bag, and we didn't quite know what was in the big army bag, but didn't know if it was illegal or or whatever. But we started down the road. We started talking to this guy, and at first it was like, oh, this is uncomfortable. We were in a Chevy S10 truck, and we got 3 full-size adults. And poor Adam was sitting in the middle with that seatbelt, that goes straight up. That it's really solid, so there's like you can't move it, and he's just like, ah. But as we went on down the road, we started talking to this guy, and he found out he's working 2 jobs. He's trying to put his kids into a private school to get them a better education, and his wife had been reading the Book of Mormon. We started asking us, what exactly is that book? And instead of telling the whole story, Adam said, well, let me share a story out of the book. And Adam began to talk about, he said there was a guy that had a dream, and he begins to tell him about Lehi's vision and Nephi's vision. And at the end, this guy you could see his countenance changing a little bit, and our countenance was changing. And we're like, hey, can we buy you supper? And we pull over and buy him supper. And the next thing you know, all we wanted to do is make sure he was comfortable. And I'm like, what? Let's just drive on a little farther. Hey, let's just take you back to Tulsa. So we drove like way into the wee hours of the morning and pulled up to his house. Not a good place to be at night in Tulsa. and his wife came running out of the back of the house, and she says, "Oh my gosh, you made it home! You made it home!" And this was before cell phones. We didn't have cell phones. Uh, and he introduced us to us. He said, "These guys are ministers, and we were talking about the Book of Mormon." She goes, "I've been reading that. These missionaries have been coming to my house," and she just started crying that he was home safe, and we all just like held hands and put our arms around each other and prayed right there in the middle of the street in Tulsa, like 2 a.m, and got back in our car and went to a hotel, slept a few hours, and got up down the road. Well, we find out that we didn't know this, but we'd left California early, and the missionary corps said, "Well, we're going to send you guys somewhere different. We're going to send you to Oklahoma, not too far from Tulsa." And so we were able to meet this family, and we never saw the guy again, but the wife was interested, and we got involved with some of the local ministers there, and she wanted to continue hearing about the gospel. So it was kind of neat. It was neat that as we shared this story, we weren't trying to tell him about Joseph and how this was a divine book. We just shared the truths in the story and how he became engaged through that. And as we did that our predicament, our uncomfortableness faded away, and all we cared about was wanting this guy to be happy, and like he became our responsibility, and it was like the softening of the heart. And after all those months we spent in California trying to get one person to buy into the Restore Church and come to this church, and that we just found that this was the most joyful thing, was telling someone about Jesus and sharing love through that story with them. And we were reinvigorated, renewed. We got our spiritual, we got that energy, like, let's go do this some more, but
right. Well, and that's really what the good news is. The gospel means good news, and the good news is Jesus. The good news is not trying to convert people to a church. So that I think what you experience, get just that pure, being able just to love somebody, being able to be loved, have God love through you it's exciting.
Yeah, to take someone who's had obviously rough life and on the down and outs, and when they hear that on the other side of these dark and dreary wasteland, that there's a fruit that's going to be more great than anything they can imagine. What a wonderful story to describe to someone. I mean,
right. Well,
so
and to hang on, we know,
right.
Not to skip too far ahead, but obviously the rod of iron is the word of God or Jesus, and hang on to Jesus. You might be in a mist of darkness right now, but if you hang on, there's going to be fruit at the end.
Right.
So.
Well, coincidence, the Lord moving. I know that my heart changed, and I know that I felt love. And so like when you partake of the fruit and you want to share it with somebody, we honestly just we were thinking, how can we make, Adam's taking his jacket out here, use this for a pillow, and and you can it's just his welfare became our major concern. And that wasn't where our hearts were at 30 minutes. I'm like, why is this lady in front of me taking so long? We got to get back on the road and serve the Lord, in this. So when your heart changes like that, it's a blessing anyway. So, yeah. All right, brother, we'll pick up next time, continue through the vision, get into Nephi and see what he saw. So
sounds good.
All right. Be kind to each other. We're just walking each other home, hopefully holding on to that rod so we all arrive home safely. God bless.
Take care.